In this episode, as I promised, we'll look at the story of the shady political strategist and anti-cultist Pavel Broide, an official member of Rossiers in Ukraine until 2013, based on a publication from the website actfiles.org. Next, you can see the contents. There will be plenty of interesting topics. For the first time, we'll cover the AUAC, All-Ukrainian Apologetic Center in the name of St. John Chrysostom, and its members. We'll also address a very important question. Did anti-cultism in Ukraine actually have Russian roots? Then we'll continue gathering evidence of Kremenovskaya's links to the terrorist organization Rossiers. And at the end, I'll try to shed light on the role of Alexander Dvorkin, Alexander Novopashin, and Rossiers in the tragic events in Ukraine. This is a serious topic. It was first raised in the Impact documentary last year, and I really hope it will continue to be raised at a higher professional level. The episode will be long, very long, but since we're talking about Article 111, the evidence must also be weighty. Much will have to be tied together within a single video, although this is already the second episode. The first came out more than a month ago. I highly recommend watching it if you haven't yet, to understand the context. Okay, let's go. Pavel Broide is a shady political strategist and an anti-cultist from Rossiers. Broader information about him first appeared on actfiles.org in the article, Europe, Open Your Eyes If You Don't Want War. It stated, among other things, that until 2013, Broide was a key Rossiers figure in Ukraine, actively carrying out subversive activities to destabilize the state, outwardly disguised as fighting dangerous sects. In 2011, the All-Ukrainian Apologetic Center in the name of St. John Chrysostom, abbreviated as AUAC, hereafter I'll just say AUAC, was created. I mentioned it in the previous episode. He was an official member of Rossiers in Ukraine. Here is Broide in a group photo of Rossiers. Alexander Dvorkin is in the center. Broide is on the far right. Looking at the old list of Rossiers members on the site antisecta.ru, archived version, we find that alongside AUAC in Ukraine, there was also a branch of the international anti-cult organization Dialogue Center, founded in the 1980s, specifically 1981, by Friedrich Wilhelm Huck and Johannes Agard. These two pioneers of modern anti-cultism, who carried Nazi ideology through the years, are covered in detail in the Impact documentary. I recommend watching it if you want to understand. I suspect that this film was the reason several highly popular YouTube channels were deleted last year, which means the information is worth it. Johannes Agard and the central office of Dialogue Center were based in Denmark. That's where a young and ambitious Alexander Dvorkin did his internship in the early 90s. That's where he hauled away suitcases of photocopied documents to start building his empire. But let's get back to Ukraine. The Vinnytsia branch of the Dialogue Center was run by Archpriest Alexei Volkov. I couldn't find any photos of him. In the article, Europe, Open Your Eyes If You Don't Want War, we find that there were 9 regional branches of Dialogue Center. In addition to Vinnytsia, these included the southern cities of Zaporizhzhia, Melitopol, Donetsk, Mykolaiv, Odessa, as well as Obuhiv and Smila. By the way, why specifically southern cities? In Kyiv, Rossiers' main player was AUAC. In addition to Jonah Cherepanov, Pavel Broide, and Vladimir Rogatin, it also included its leader, Archimandrite of the Russian Orthodox Church, Moscow Patriarchate, Luka Vynarchuk.
Archimandrite Luka Vynarchuk.
For simplicity, let me draw a diagram. Look, a UAC and Dialogue Center operated in Ukraine, and in both, the key figure was Pavel Broide. AUAC was part of Rossiers. Dialogue was part of Rossiers, the International Dialogue Center, and also the anti-cult organization FECRIS. I made 2 episodes about FECRIS on my channel last year, if you recall. FECRIS is based in France. According to FECRIS's official membership page in 2016, Ukraine was represented by no less than 3 organizations. Sectarian Ukraine, Pavel Broide, Rossiers, the Dnipro Dialogue Center, a branch run by Hryhori Chloba, Edist Ratsiers, with direct ties, and Unia Vizimodistvi website. Who owned that site is still unclear. Fekris and Ratsiers were very closely linked because Alexander Dvorkin was the permanent president of Ratsiers and vice president of Fekris for the entire 12 years. Dvorkin was also vice president of the International Dialogue Center. So no matter how different and respectable these organizations' names sounded, in fact, it was one sprawling international network. When people in Slovakia or elsewhere claim with clever faces that there's no such thing as an international anti-cult structure, they're deeply mistaken. To illustrate this, let me give you another example. Take 4 different parts of the world: America, Europe, Russia, and China. Different ideological and political courses, different cultures, religions, languages, laws, and ways of life. On top of that, constant economic confrontation. Yet, by some remarkable coincidence, anti-cultists from America, Europe, China, and Russia act in concert despite cultural, economic, and political differences. They meet, attend conferences, befriend, share experiences, and essentially form a single approach to restrict human rights and freedoms. At least, that's what's on the surface. Notice, the same organizations come under attack: Jehovah's Witnesses, Pentecostals, Scientologists, Moonies, Falun Gong followers, and many others. A natural question arises. How does that happen? Why are these organizations always at the center of anti-cult rhetoric? Even the Allatra International movement, which mainly focuses on climate issues, came under fire in Russia, Europe, and China. Doesn't it feel like there is a single coordinating center behind all this? One that deliberately sets the agenda? If you analyze open source information, you inevitably arrive at one very simple and obvious conclusion. The same man, Alexander Dvorkin, pops up practically everywhere. He's managed to leave his trace all over the world. How did he succeed? He's had 30 years, even more. He began his vigorous anti-cult activity back in 1993 when he founded the Center for Religious Studies in the name of Hieromartyr Irenaeus of Lyons. So it's logical to ask, is this a coincidence? Or are we really dealing with a well-coordinated international network? Personally, I have the answer to that question. Positioning himself as an expert on dangerous sex, Pavel Broide actively built connections with journalists, media outlets, government agencies, law enforcement, and even intelligence services. As a true anti-cultist, Broide constantly drew the authorities and public's attention to the need to implement anti-cult legislation. Passing such a law in Ukraine would have opened access to levers of pressure, made it possible to pin the sect label on any undesirable organization, shape public opinion against them, and ultimately push them out of the legal and informational space, while actively implanting in the Ukrainian public's consciousness narratives favorable to Ratsiers. Broide began building his agent network in Ukraine long before 2011. As early as 2000 to 2003, he served as director of the Zaporizhia branch of Dialogue Center. In 2002, an anti-cult conference was held in Vinnytsia, where the speakers included Alexander Dvorkin himself and Pavel Broide, who at that time already held the position of president of the All-Ukrainian Dialogue Center and coordinator of the Association for Protection Against Psychological Violence. The press release on the Orthodox Ukraine website ended with the line, quote, "The conference approved the center's presidium, electing Professor Alexander Dvorkin as president of the Eastern European Dialogue Center and Pavel Broide as executive director." From 2000 to 2013, Ukraine saw many similar conferences and roundtables. Here is a rare surviving video recording of Broide giving a lecture in Kovel, 2012. Incidentally, Broide quoted Irenaeus of Lions himself.
Here we can only recall the words of Hieromartyr Irenaeus of Lyons, addressed to the first people. Not yet having become human, they wanted to become gods.
Judging by the full video of this lecture, one gets the impression that Pavel was very well prepared in the field of anti-cultism ideologically, although where they get these quotes from isn't entirely clear. I'll come back to the legend about Irenaeus later. Broide also possessed information warfare techniques. On a Zaporizhia forum in 2008, an anonymous user described a rather interesting scheme, which Broide and his team of super crap PR specialists used against competitors. Keep in mind, by then, Broide had already been in Ratsir's anti-cult structure under Dvorkin for more than 8 years. Let's read an excerpt from that forum and compare it to Ratsir's tactics. I quote, "The information warfare technology is simple," the anonymous poster wrote. "First comes the informational crap, as Pavel Broide liked to say, and it appears on one of the free anonymous sites. Then it's quoted by more respectable toilet websites. And the information campaign ends with publication in Zaporizhzhia's super popular battle sheet, Zerkalo Zaporizhzhia, edited by Sasha Hajduk. He was covered in the previous episode. Then, that newspaper is distributed through underage kids at the doors of the regional administration and council. A very similar method is used by Ratsirs. First, a dirty news item appears on some regional portal or small-time rag. Then it's picked up and quoted by Ratsir's larger main sites. There was another point in that post I can't help but comment on. I quote, "Not only did they pour the crap, they also blamed the ones they poured it on." Brilliant. Doesn't this little trick remind you of anything? For some reason, I'm reminded of the story with Alatra. In Russia, they were accused of being a project of Ukrainian and American intelligence, while in Ukraine, they were accused of being a Russian intelligence project. Who did that? Ratsirs did. Who else? By the way, according to an anonymous source from the same Zaporizhia forum, Broide's nickname among his colleagues was the Führer. Broide became especially well known in connection with the hacking of Vladislav Surkov's emails. Surkov is known as a political advisor to Vladimir Putin in the conflict in eastern Ukraine and is considered one of the architects of the so-called Russian world. In October 2016, the hacker collective Inform, Napalm, published hacked emails from Surkov's office, making huge amounts of correspondence public. Among them were emails confirming ties between pro-Kremlin activists who organized actions against the Ukrainian state and representatives of the AUAC, that very AUAC. It turns out, pro-Russian activists in Ukraine were coordinating anti-Ukrainian actions, terrorist attacks, arsons, disinformation operations, as well as preparing budgets and reporting on the work. It's worth emphasizing that Broide spread narratives with manipulative elements in the Ukrainian media space that carried a hidden destabilizing agenda beneficial to Ratsirs. His activity, like that of many other anti-cultists, shows that they didn't shy away from a double game. One aimed at deepening societal divisions, spreading disinformation, creating precedents for civilian conflicts, and laying the groundwork for future clashes of interests. This overall escalation of ideologies and opinions is exactly what Ratsir's agent Pavel Broide successfully engaged in throughout his anti-cult career. In emails sent to Surkov, Broide outlined proposals that included creating specialized websites and alternative media aimed at specific segments of the Ukrainian audience. For example, in the 2019 report, The Internal Kitchen of Russia's Hybrid War in Ukraine, published on Euromaidan Press, reveals elements of Broide's anti-Ukrainian activities and his correspondence with Surkov's associates. There you can find the following. I quote, "In a letter to Surkov dated July 10, 2014, Bryusov conveyed Broida's proposal, where he insisted that launching Russia-controlled media resources would ensure sustained influence on the Ukrainian audience and would also be a cheaper option. Broida proposed creating specialized websites for Russian propaganda. The first, a political analysis site. The second, a military news site. The third, regional portals promoting separatism in southeastern Ukraine. The fourth, an anti-war site. The fifth, a site for the Ukrainian nationalist audience under the slogan, 'Stop Feeding Donbass.'" Quote from Broida, "Today, an effective nationwide PR campaign using central media resources costs $400,000 to $450,000 per month, plus costs for PR specialists," Broida wrote in his letter to Vladislav Surkov. This we read in the Surkov leaks document. Another quote, "Whereas a large internet resource can deliver the same results with a budget 4 to 5 times lower," Broida continues. He then tallies up a calculation showing that in 8 months a Russian propaganda site could be built from scratch and reach Ukraine's top 5 for a mere $5 million. Top 20, $2,800,000. Top 75, $668,360. In fact, it was for just such sums that Broida, an official agent of Ratsiers, Russian Association of Centers for the Study of Religions and Sects, at one time tried to sell off Ukraine's independence. The hacker obtained dossier on Pavel Broida, in which he gleams like a shiny new penny, also deserves attention. His ambitions are impressive. I'll quote excerpts. "Participated in promoting the values of Slavic unity and anti-globalism, orthodox traditional values," speaks Broida about himself. "Participated in a number of PR campaigns, conducting a total of 9 election campaigns, as well as in a number of corporate conflicts, providing informational and legal support. Also, on a commercial basis, provided analytical reviews and reports on the general political situation in the region and on conflicts among business groups and political forces. Took part in 2005 to 2006 in preparing and conducting events in Russia to train youth organizations, Nashi, Young Russia, and others. Then comes mention of AUAC and its 20 diocesan centers. Starting in 2012, Broida launched a movement of truly cosmic proportions. Let me briefly list it. Monitoring, data processing, preparing analytics for the governor, the Presidential Administration of Ukraine, the Interior Ministry, the SBU, the Prosecutor's Office, the Tax Service, coordination with political party structures, law enforcement agencies, and the SBU, building and running an informant network, supervising an anti-raider committee, a creative department, and a posting service, supervising media outlets and his own media projects, producing investigative films, regular TV programs, managing and administering 4 newspapers and 5 websites, forming and overseeing more than 10 public organizations, organizing and supervising a communicator service, seeding rumors, organizing street actions, organizing military patriotic work with youth, media, buying. That's the process of purchasing advertising space. For those unfamiliar, working with members of parliament and local council deputies, simply Napoleonic in scale. And it's important to keep in mind that Broida was and remained an agent of Ratsiers. Also, since the beginning of 2014, Broida concludes, I quote, served as a member of the board and head of the analytical department of the Research Center, Laboratory of Political Analysis and Forecasting, Kiev, which on a commercial basis performs monitoring and prepares analytical products in the political sphere and in the analysis of relationships among FPGs, financial political groups, remotely conducts daily analysis of the situation using open sources and insider information about Kiev and certain regions of southeastern Ukraine. Another area of the center's activity was preparing PR projects. These are the kinds of people employed by Ratsiers, if anyone thought they were harmless bearded dandelions, like I used to think. What happened next to the pro-Russian activist Broida, you may ask? He fled to Russia and disappeared. In 2019, an unconfirmed rumor appeared in some media outlets claiming that Pavel Broida had been killed in St. Petersburg. But personally, I don't believe it. Back in 2003 in Zaporizhia, these crap artists already buried their accomplice Vladimir Noskov in the media. And in 2006, Noskov miraculously came back to life to take the editor-in-chief's chair at the site Sectarian Ukraine, ukrsekta.info. We talked about that pro-Dvorkin project in the previous episode. Note the level of cynicism. Broida himself commented in a newspaper article about his comrade Noskov's death. Well, if Noskov left this world at all, it was only briefly, judging by his work biography. Why do I dwell on such details? So that you can get a fuller picture of what Ratsir's anti-cultists were actually doing in Ukraine, and why, in the case of Kremenovskaya and Svyatogor, it amounts to treason today. Vladimir Noskov, another pro-Russian Ratsir's anti-cult figure, journalist, PR specialist, and operative. At one time, Noskov published on Russian Ratsir's outlets, where he deliberately undermined trust in Ukraine. This article appeared in 2006 on the apologetic portal To the Truth, one of Ratsir's leading portals, owned by the missionary department of the Tomsk Diocese of the ROCMP, whose head is the scandalous Maxim Stepanenko. Even then, the article clearly conveyed the line that those who came to power in Ukraine were not merely political opponents, but dangerous sectarians. This wasn't just an opinion. It was rhetoric aimed at gradual dehumanization, first of individual political leaders, then of the entire nation. And in the years that followed, this rhetoric only intensified. It penetrated the media space, websites, news outlets, interviews, TV programs, and talk shows. And already in 2014, it was voiced openly and at full volume. That's how the dehumanization of Ukraine began, and which I'll discuss in the final part of this film. The fact that Noskov was working in full accordance with Ratsir's guidelines is also confirmed by another small episode. In 2013, two different articles appeared in Russia and Ukraine about sects, with identical wording. The most dangerous sect is the one your loved ones have joined. In Russia, it belonged to Dvorkin. In Ukraine, to Noskov. In this simple way, the population was consistently brainwashed. And of course, as a true Dvorkin sect adept, Noskov in his articles recommended turning to his leader. Noskov managed to flee Ukraine, though he ended up listed on the Mirotvorets website for undermining Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. To this day, he continues to stir the pot on his Telegram channel, Noskovsky Narrativy, Noskov's Narratives. He writes from Russia about Ukrainian Zaporizhia and still obsessively mixes anti-cult topics with politics. Chrysostom Hryschenko, Archimandrite of the Russian Orthodox Church, Moscow Patriarchate, another agent of the Russian organization Ratsirs in Ukraine. On the Orthodox Life Pravlife.og portal, in an article from 2016, he cites Irenaeus of Lyons' work Against Heresies. Let me remind you again that the center in the name of Irenaeus of Lyons was created by Dvorkin in 1993. Marking the beginning of the modern Inquisition in the CIS and beyond. Let's read the article itself. At yet another Pravlife meeting on January 27, 2016, in the Kiev-Pechersk Lavra chambers, Chrysostom Hryschenko, as a specialist in Orthodox apologetics, stroked his beard and solemnly criticized Alatura. January 2016, the book lay before him on the table, and the article was titled, On the Most Dangerous Sects. This was the early period when Ratsirs was launching its first information attacks to discredit the Alatra international public movement, if anyone remembers. And in the example of this article, we again see that this work in Ukraine was initiated precisely by the Russian ROC, MP, Ratsirs, and Dvorkin's Irenaeus Center. This is evidence. And the material in the newspaper Pivdena Pravda testifies that in 2015, Chrysostom Hryschenko was head of the Kiev Apologetic Center in the name of Saint John Chrysostom after Broida had already fled. Chrysostom was well acquainted with Vladimir Rogatin, another Ratsir's Russian agent, though in truth they were all Ratsir's agents. I cited a fragment about Rogatin from the Impact documentary in the previous episode. Among AUAC activists, one can also single out Maxim Denisenko, a member of the center's board. In the Sumy Diocese, he oversaw the media sphere as head of the diocesan press service. In 2012, as part of a Ukrainian delegation, he participated in an anti-cult conference in Serbia, traveling there with Jonah Cherepanov, Chrysostom Hryschenko, and Vladimir Rogatin. Interestingly, 2 years later, in 2014, the patriotic Russian propaganda portal, Russkaya Narodnaya Linia, posted a news item claiming that some extremists had allegedly tried to blow up Maxim Denisenko for his supposed active stance in defense of canonical orthodoxy in Ukraine. If we take a closer look at the site of the explosion outside a Sunday school, we can only smile. Some little firecracker went off, but Russian propaganda sounded the alarm that a horrific attempt had been made on the life of the heroic fighter against Ukrainian sects. On the actfiles.org website, there is an article called Alexander Dvorkin, a single anti-cult network. It contains a lot of interesting information. Among other things, what caught my attention was the list of Ratsier's agents in Ukraine. In the next part of my video, I'll follow that list and highlight a few of them to once again show proof that everyone involved in fighting sects in Ukraine had a single ideological center, located and still located in Russia. And virtually all worked according to Dvorkin's playbook. This is a fact. This is the truth. As one leading Ukrainian religious scholar, about whom I'll speak a little later in this video, once joked, quote, "No one actually has ever seen a living sectarian, but everyone is terribly afraid and thinks, oh, if only there were no sectarianism." Jonah Cherepanov of Obuhiv, chairman of the Board of Trustees of the Apologetic Center, in the name of St. John Chrysostom, an official Ratsier's member acquainted with Alexander Dvorkin. Let's note this. For some reason, I'm reminded of an incident in 2015, when a session was held in the Rada in memory of those who died in the ATO, and representatives of many religious confessions were invited. At one point, everyone was asked to stand and honor the heroes. The entire hall rose to its feet, except for 3 representatives of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the Moscow Patriarchate. Among them was Jonah Cherepanov. And no matter how ROC-controlled media later tried to justify their action, everyone remembered it. Grigory Hloba. Let me dwell on him in more detail. Head of the Dnipro branch of Dialogue, part of Broida's team. In 2019, Hloba took part in the annual theological conference at St. Tikhon's Orthodox University of Humanities in Moscow, which was attended by more than 300 people. Among the participants and speakers was the entire Ratsier's leadership: Dvorkin, Novopashin, Voat, Karolova, Kuzmin, and others. The Dnipro anti-cultist Risha Hloba delivered a report on the paths of involving minors in the Chinese sect Falun Gong. In addition, Hloba was one of the authors of the website Sectarian Ukraine, ukrsekta.info, where Broida, Noskov, Haiduk, Dialogue Center, AUAC, and others also published. Hloba's articles were also published by Stepanenko on the Ratsier's portal kistine.ru, just like Noskov's. Hloba also appeared on Dvorkin's Irenaeus of Lyons site, and even had a column on the Russian propaganda portal, Russkaya Narodnaya Linia, where he told die-hard Russian world patriots about the alarming Falun Gong situation in Ukraine. Incidentally, his main focus in the anti-cult movement was justifying China's inhumane repression of Falun Gong. Yes, you heard right. Grigory authoritatively promoted the idea that there were no tortures, no executions or organ harvesting from Chinese prisoners. According to him, the information war waged by the Falun Gong political movement against the People's Republic of China had been going on for years, using rather harsh black PR and demonization tactics. Apparently, in his view, constant talk of the genocide of thousands of people was quite enough to undermine the Chinese government's reputation in the eyes of the world. He even published a book in 2011 titled Falun Gong Under the Sprawling Cranberry Tree. Here are some quotes from it. Falun Gong followers often ask me, Hloba writes in his book, why I'm sure there are no bloody repressions in China. Am I not afraid of being wrong and becoming an unwitting accomplice to crimes? I'll say this, I'm not writing about China or about what is happening in China. I've never been there and don't know what's happening there. Obviously, the reliability of Russian translations of American news agencies doesn't inspire much trust. However, over the past few years, Falun Gong activities in Dnipropetrovsk have unfolded before my eyes, so I can draw some conclusions about them. That's why I write not about Falun Gong in China, because I have no reliable information about that, but about Falun Gong in Ukraine. And then, as the text goes on, Hloba falls into an amnesiac rant, bursting into a whole expose where he tears to shreds the conclusions of international commissions with his iron logic. I'll provide a little background. Since the early 2000s, for 20 years, researchers, human rights defenders, and expert commissions tried to determine whether it was true that 1,000 Falun Gong practitioners were executed in China and their organs sold illegally on domestic and international transplant markets. The Chinese authorities denied everything. Naturally, they did. Practically all the world's news agencies wrote about it. Massimo Introvigne has launched the famous project Bitter Winter. It was launched specifically to highlight this problem in China. Dozens of articles were written on the topic. Dozens of authors banded together to confront the inhumanity and genocide. Finally, in 2019, an independent investigation called the China Tribunal was launched. After 12 months, its members unanimously concluded that forced organ harvesting had been carried out over many years across China on a significant scale. Falun Gong practitioners were one of the main sources of these organs. Crimes against humanity, against Falun Gong and Uyghurs were proven beyond any doubt. Yet back in 2011, Brisha Hloba already understood everything. He wrote a book about it. He attended conferences and peddled his, or perhaps not his, but Dvorkin's, nonsense to gullible ears. And still, you can get used to a lot of things, but it's hard to get used to their cynicism. In the section Amusing Arithmetic, after a report stating, I quote, from 2001 to 2006, at least 41,000 Falun Gong followers became victims of organ transplantation. Little below Hloba starts his investigation with a jaw-dropping question. From whence the firewood? He asks. In other words, where's the data coming from? From whence the firewood? As if we're talking not about thousands of innocently tortured people, but some can of beer with dried fish. And then, naturally, he demolishes all the Commission's findings with his outlandish logic, just to tell the world, you don't understand anything, you're idiots. And so to this day, Hloba scares the city of Dnipro with the scary Falun Gong sect. His latest article came out in 2024. Nothing has changed in his mind. I dwell on these details for a reason. I'm showing you the face of anti-cultism, the ugliness of the acolytes of Dvorkin's totalitarian sect, because being a rat's ears agent is a diagnosis. The next soldier of the Invisible Front in Ukraine is Viktor Chernyshov, professor of theology, founder and head of the Informational and Educational Center Nadezhda, Hope, lecturer at the Kiev Theological Seminary, who previously held weekly classes in the Kiev Pechersky Lavra. He was not officially part of Ratseers. In order to understand where Chernyshov drew his inspiration from, it's enough to visit the Nadezhda Center's website and look at the page modestly titled Professor Chernyshov. There we see the already familiar names of Nazi ideologues: Friedrich Wilhelm Hack, Johannes Agard, Thomas Gandau, and of course Alexander Dvorkin from Ratseers. By the way, on actfiles.org, there are two very interesting articles about Haq and Agard, highlighting the biographies of these anti-cult movement leaders and their role in transmitting Nazi ideas from Walter Kunneth to Alexander Dworkin. Like all Ratzier's adherents, Chernyshov also parroted Dworkin's words.
Hence, there are sects and there is a sect. These are completely different things. Thus, there are rationalistic sects, mystical sects, totalitarian sects. So, what is a totalitarian sect?
Authoritarian, hierarchical organizations of any orientation, destructive toward established social structures, culture, order, family, individual, and society as a whole, practicing covert psychological abuse of their followers using a certain methodology.
The same fanatical nonsense about totalitarian sects and scary Jehovah's Witnesses, like a mechanical robot with a broken record inside. Dworkin's Zombieland. But when you come across Chernyshov's remarks about Allatra, you realize that the professor took his nonsense a little further, coming up with something original. Listen, the ideologists of Allatra promise unimaginable wealth, dizzying success, immediate results, and rapid career advancement. What an idiot. I bet there are tens of thousands of people on the other side of the screen laughing with me right now. And after that, we're supposed to call him a professor? For some reason, I'm reminded of one character. Remember the phrase, the meeting place cannot be changed?
The dog was barking at a jump marking.
And if you look at the date of this publication, October 20th, 2023, it becomes clear that this was the beginning of the most powerful information attack on the Allatra movement in Ukraine in the entire history of Ratzier's campaigning. That was when the raids began. On November 1st, 2023, the National Police, together with the SBU, on the basis of unmotivated court orders, carried out about 70 raids across Ukraine. Was it a coincidence that Chernyshov had written his article right before that? One has to ask. Let's take a look at another of his publications, the infamous first article about Allatra on the Orthodox Life Pravlife portal. I've cited it many times and will come back to it again. It was published on October 5th, 2015. But few people know that just 2 months later, on November 30th, 2015, another article by Viktor Chernyshov appeared on the same Pravlife website with an identical banner. Another coincidence? In this little piece, Chernyshov called Allatra the latest sectarian brand and allowed himself to speak disrespectfully about Igor Mikhailovich Danilov. He even gave a hint about the location of his clinic on the grounds of the Kiev-Pechersk Lavra. The fact that for more than 10 years, people from all over the world had come to this clinic in their last hope to get rid of spinal pain, to stand on their feet, to find hope for a new life, and that these people really did get back on their feet thanks to Igor Mikhailovich's unique method didn't interest this blotter at all. No. After all, he was a professor of the Theological Academy. If all those people whom Igor Mikhailovich had helped suddenly decided to come and say thank you, I wonder how many kilometers or tens of kilometers that line would stretch. Like all Ratzier's adherents, Chernyshov pushed for the Russian Orthodox Church Moscow Patriarchate and tried to crush Ukraine's desire for religious independence from Moscow. He fought very actively in this holy information war, writing articles for the Russian audience on the propaganda portal Russkaya Narodnaya Linia. Anti-cultists always have an open door there. For global orthodoxy, the Kiev Patriarchate is a dead structure, Chernyshov wrote on the pages of the portal Orthodox Ukraine. And if you go from the website of the Informational and Educational Center Nadezhda to its official Facebook page, you'll notice a stylish young man named Andrei Vidishenko, a political scientist and assistant to the pro-Russian MP Medvedchuk. Vidishenko is a well-known promoter of the ideas of Russian autocracy. On Chernyshov's site, there are articles that describe Andrei Vidishenko as a close friend of the center, noting that Andrei Vidishenko even runs several of its projects. There's even a direct link to the portal Russia in Global Affairs, to a blatantly anti-Ukrainian media portal. And here's Vidishenko on the patriotic portal Russkaya Narodnaya Linia, stuffing readers' heads with ideas about organizing a Russian Orthodox civilization. Why do I say all this? For the same reason as before, and still about the same thing. Anti-cult activity in Ukraine had and still has a Russian trace. And there is no shortage of proof. Behind the political persecution of Alatra in Ukraine stands Russia's rat seers. Dvorkin. No one else. No one but rat seers stands to gain from this. The next figure from our rat seers list on actfiles.org deserves special attention. Alexei Chaplin, archpriest of the Russian Orthodox Church Moscow Patriarchate in Ukraine, a member of Pavel Broide's team. He graduated from the history department of Zaporizhia University. In 2009, he was appointed head of the diocesan department for affairs of the Zaporizhia and Melitopol diocese of the UOCMP. Later, he headed the missionary department of the Zaporizhia diocese. He was part of the AUAC, the All-Ukrainian Apologetic Center. In 2014, he fled Ukraine. He supports the occupation regime and believes Ukraine is part of Russia. Chaplin is a remarkable figure. I would put it this way: a rising star in the firmament of spiritual verbiage. He first made a loud name for himself in the fall of 2016 on the site Blagodatny Ogan, Holy Fire. His lips produced an ode dedicated to slavery. They even made a voiceover for it. I'll say right away, this is not a fake, but yet another ugly mask of anti-cultism.
Archpriest Alexei Chaplin. The main problem of contemporary orthodoxy, and frankly of Russia as such, because there is no Russia without orthodoxy, is that we have forgotten how to be slaves. Christianity is a religion of conscious and voluntary slavery. The slave mentality isn't some hidden subtext, it's the normative worldview for an Orthodox Christian. Modern society worships the idol of social rights and freedoms, and only the Orthodox Church continues to firmly insist that a human being is a powerless slave of God. That's why today's free-thinking person feels so out of place in an Orthodox church where everything is steeped in the archaic atmosphere of slavery. What stands behind the concept of slavery to God is revealed to us in the gospel. A slave owns nothing of his own. He lives solely by the mercy of his master, who, after settling accounts with him, finds him either a good servant, obedient to his commands, and worthy of even greater mercy from his Lord, or wicked and lazy, deserving of severe punishment. Slavery to God strips Christians even of attachment to their closest family, husband, wife, parents, children. They are not ours. They are also slaves of our Lord. And our Master demands that we be attached only to Him and be ready at any moment without regret to part not only with our dearest loved ones, but with our very lives, which do not belong to the slave, but entirely to God. And here, modernist, prideful slogans like "God's slave means slave to no one else" won't help. Because in Christian tradition, to be a slave of God also means to be a slave of the Tsar, a slave of the state, from Russian gosudar, sovereign, having the same root as gosударство, state, a slave of the judge, a slave of your superior, a slave of the government official, a slave of the policeman. The chief apostle Peter instructs Christians in this way: submit yourselves for the Lord's sake to every human authority, whether to the emperor as the supreme authority, or to governors, who are sent by him to punish those who do wrong and to commend those who do right, as God's slaves. And further, slaves, in reverent fear of God, submit yourselves to your masters, not only to those who are good and considerate, but also to those who are harsh. For it is commendable if someone bears up under the pain of unjust suffering because they are conscious of God. The Saint Apostle Paul echoes him: let every soul be subject to the governing authorities. For there is no authority except from God, and the authorities that exist are appointed by God, and threatens that whoever resists the authority resists the ordinance of God, and those who resist will bring judgment on themselves. So yes, our critics are right. We're a very convenient religion for the state. That's why Christianity built great empires, because only Orthodox slaves are capable of the great feat of self-sacrifice in both war and peace. Even the USSR was only able to recover within the borders of the Russian Empire thanks to the potential of the psychological slavery that persisted subconsciously among the Russian people inherited from Orthodoxy. October 19th, 2016, Archpriest Alexei Chaplin. The article is titled "On Lost Slavery and Market Freedom." It's quite long and all in the same spirit. After this, There are no words left, only emotions. Actually, wait, there are still other people's words. Because according to Chaplain 2.0, it turns out that total submission without reasoning and the acceptance of all injustices from earthly authorities is the highest virtue. It's hard to imagine a more damaging betrayal or a bigger hospital pass to the church.
And in 2018, Chaplain claimed that the pension reform was punishment for the sins of the people. So don't complain, or you'll get something worse. It's as if the Middle Ages are making a comeback. Next on the list is Vasily Anisimov, head of the press service of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the Moscow Patriarchate, a publicist, social figure, and journalist. Russian mass media dubbed him the father of Orthodox journalism, even calling him Vasily the Great. Anisimov was published by Russian propaganda outlets like Russkaya Linia, Russian Line, Russkaya Narodnaya Linia, Russian People's Line, Pravoslavia.ru, and others. He was a fierce opponent of Ukraine's religious independence and of breaking away from the Moscow Patriarchate. Judging by this photo, Anisimov was also acquainted with Alexander Dvorkin. That probably explains why he so actively wove anti-cultist slang into his writing. According to him, sectarianism in Ukraine was supported at the state level. He said so on Russian patriotic websites. Here's a quote. "They spread sects across Ukraine," he complained. "At first there were 15, then 20, and now no one even knows how many sects there are, and all these sects are recognized as religious denominations." Moreover, he called the Kyiv Patriarchate a terrorist sect. And these weren't just empty words delivered to the wind. This is stigmatization. And whether Vasily did it knowingly or not, doesn't really matter. Over the years, this tactic of dehumanization by rat-seers, because this is clearly their handiwork, so their thoughts and ideas matured into the very hatred that pushed Russians into a bloody war. It matured into a collective madness directed at the Ukrainian people. Nothing like this happens spontaneously, and we understand this well. First, the seeds are thrown, words. Then, over the years, they are nurtured, watered, and stoked. As a result, we witness what we see today, hatred and insanity. Anisimov also supported the creation of an independent and, in quotes, expert council in Ukraine. The same old ideas were being promoted. And what's most interesting is that now we know why. Let's briefly sum up the activity of AUAC, the All-Ukrainian Apologetic Center of John Chrysostom. In reality, it functioned as a sprawling rat-seers agent network in Ukraine. It included various organizations and groups working to undermine democratic values and conduct covert sabotage. This points to a certain level of rat-seers' influence on all of Ukrainian society. AUAC coordinated the work of apologetic centers within the structures of the Synod of the UOCMP, as well as in dioceses and parishes, a broad agent network. Having such organizations allowed rat-seers to effectively carry out its initiatives and influence religious, social, legislative, and even political processes in the country. Thanks to this, anti-cultist ideas and methods were more actively promoted, aimed at discrediting groups they deemed undesirable, including, in particular, the international movement Allatra. The goal of such actions was also to destabilize society and undermine public trust in state institutions. One of AUAC's key stated objectives was to defend traditional moral values and the rights and interests of the Church. To that end, they used various tools, legal mechanisms, media campaigns, active cooperation with government agencies, and legislative initiatives. It's worth noting that one of AUAC's listed activities was the recruitment of experts and specialists to conduct sociological, psychological, and religious studies and evaluations, carrying out such evaluations in Ukraine. As we already know, Russian anti-cultists pursued the same goals. I discussed this in detail in the previous episode. In 2009, the Expert Council on State Religious Evaluation at the Ministry of Justice of the Russian Federation was headed by Dvorkin and his team. From that moment on, Ratziers gained the power to directly decide who would be allowed to exist and who would not, who qualifies as a totalitarian sect, and who can be accused of extremism and shut down altogether. An analysis of Broid's activities allows us to draw well-founded conclusions that fighting sects was not his goal, but merely a tool. He used it to systematically integrate himself into the media environment, build a network of contacts, and gain influence in various spheres of public and state life. The resources created with his involvement later became part of a large-scale disinformation campaign, disguised as anti-cult activity. This campaign, based on the systematic spread of lies and manipulation, contributed to creating a hostile environment that played a notable role in escalating the conflict, eventually leading to the full-scale war that continues today. The AUAC actively collaborated with the Diocese of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, as well as the Synodal Youth Department of the UOC. This points to its real influence both on religious structures and on youth environments. Moreover, the center did not act independently. It carried out specific directives received directly from the Ratziers leadership in Russia. These included anti-cult activity, cooperation with government bodies, legislative initiatives, informational influence, publishing, and educational work. Ratziers' narratives even made their way into training materials for the Security Service of Ukraine. One such example is the textbook, Strategic Communications in the Context of Hybrid War, published by the National Academy of the SBU. In the 2018 edition, Allatra International Movement was baselessly accused of promoting the Russian world and undermining Ukrainian patriotism. Let's take a closer look. Once again, we return to the first article about Allatra, published on pravlife.org on October 5th, 2015, authored by someone named Vacková, a project of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the Moscow Patriarchate. Just to remind, this article was then reposted on Ratziers' main websites. In the archived version, we see that it was allegedly published just 2 days later. 2 days after pravlife.org, that is on October 7th, 2015. But that's not all. If we type the title of the article into Google along with the keyword irony, we'll see that the Google snippet shows a date of October 5th, 2015. The very same day the article appeared on pravlife.org. So, are the dates identical? Pravlife.org and Ratziers' irene.ru on the same day? How's that for an argument? So let's keep going. And now, this vile slander from the Russian anti-cult organization Ratziers somehow ends up in an SBU training manual. Again, the monograph, Strategic Communications in the Context of Hybrid War, published in 2018, I'll reiterate. One of the sections is titled Allatra as a Project of Total Brainwashing. The authors are Snitko and Kononikina. Now let's take a look at what sources they relied on in their research. Already in the second paragraph, we see a reference to that same first defamatory article by Vacková from pravlife.org and irene.ru of Ratziers. Later in the text, there are numerous citations of sources that no longer exist. The only one still available is a commissioned journalism piece from Channel 24. And just note the title, White Brotherhood. That article is also gone. As we see, there's a banner from a Channel 24 video. The video is gone too. There's an attempt to make an association with the White Brotherhood. Who started making that association first? Who started pushing this? Ratziers, no doubt about it. Go check. They're still doing it today. Their tactic is simple. Systematic brainwashing. Later in the text, there's a link to www.apologet.kiev.ua to an expert article by Konstantin Moskalyuk, a Ukrainian candidate of theological sciences. Let's break it down, since it came up. And let's assess this candidate's level of expertise while we're at it. And what do we see? Again, by the second paragraph, Moskalyuk is citing that same Vacková, the same article from pravlife.org and Ratziers. as if they were in cahoots. Then Moskalyuk cites Oleg Nagorny from Belarus, who was actively cracking down on local sectarians using the playbooks of the same Dvorkin rat seers. And look at this telling article where Nagorny openly promotes Dvorkin's anti-cult method. It's worth mentioning Viktor Epifanov, writes Moskalyuk. Well, let's mention him. Why not? Where do we see him? On lavra.ua, irini.ru, and k-istin.ru, there's Stepanenko from Rat Seers. And is there anything original in this text? Agapit? Rigdon? Mahdi? Lots of people write about those. Archon? Another common topic in buzz tabloid journalism. The clinic at the Lavra? Nothing new. White, Brotherhood, again direct ties to Rat Seers. Greetings from Dvorkin. Bland rehashing of facts and a mythical woman from Penza, Russia, who ended up in a sect. And that article, again, was reposted on Rat Seers websites. In reality, it's a textbook Rat Seers disinfo dump. Check out the earlier parts of this investigation to see exactly how it was done. Let's keep reading. Here's something new. Time for a laugh. It turns out that Igor Mikhailovich, in addition to being the author of the brilliant one-of-a-kind book, Osteochondrosis for a Professional Patient. By the way, I highly recommend it to anyone with spinal issues. This isn't an ad. The advice in there is priceless. Find it and download it. So, back to our moment of comedy. According to Moskalyuk, Igor Mikhailovich was also supposedly a translator of fantasy, epic sci-fi, adventure, and detective fiction. What nonsense is this? Well, that's what was written there, Moskalyuk will say in his defense. I saw it there, on that website. And what can you say to that? Only this. Sit down, Moskalyuk. You got an F. Maybe before writing about someone, you should take a more professional approach to researching the topic. Watch the videos. Visit the clinic at the Lavra. I mean, since you're writing about a living man, you live in the same city as him. Not on the other side of the planet. In the same city. Meet him. Talk to him. Find out what Igor Mikhailovich actually does. But no, this candidate of theological sciences, this professor at the Department of Theology of the Orthodox Theological Academy, for some reason didn't think it was worth the effort stooping to make personal contact or dig deeper into the subject of Alatra. Instead, he scraped up some internet sludge, slurped down that reeking stew spoon fed to him by Dvorkin, and shared it with Ukrainian readers. Rat Seers slurped down that same crap from Moskalyuk and Snitko. That's what this is, a literal hand-to-mouth transmission of shit. And Snitko shared this Rat Seers shit through the SBU manual, which was then passed on to security officers who in turn carried Dvorkin's fecal matter further into society, to feed it to the public. Rude? Not really, friends. It's not rude. We should learn from mistakes. And then some smart-ass Tanya will confidently tell you that she kind of knows everything and hand you a selection of materials criticizing the activities of the Alatra IPM, featuring, see for yourself, familiar faces, experts, Irina Kremenovska, Alyona Snitko, Konstantin Moskalyuk, and Wikipedia, compiled by someone like Tempest. And then, based on these shit expert evaluations, courts will fabricate criminal cases against innocent people, slapping them with real, years-long prison sentences, just like they've been doing for the past 10 years in totalitarian Russia. It's the state's repressive policy, launched by Rat Seers, where a person is reduced to the level of a disempowered flea. Remember on what grounds a volunteer of the Alatra IPM was tried in the town of Plast, in the Chelyabinsk region, in the summer of 2023. He didn't do anything illegal. The case was based on the expert opinion of Elizaveta Shchetinina, who is well acquainted with Konstantin Putnik, who in turn is closely connected with Dvorkin. Plus, the evaluation by Alexander Goryanov. He's exposed in episode 6. Goryanov is a buddy of Yevgeny Mukhtarov. Mukhtarov is Dvorkin's personal biographer and the head of the press service at the Center for Religious Studies in the name of Hieromartyr Irenaeus of Lyons. Everything here is tied to this co-profile. I laid out the scheme for you. How it was done, how society was fed specific subliminal implants into the mind. But to be fair, there's also a positive note. In that 2021 monograph, 3 years later, the Alatra section was no longer there. It was removed. Apparently, the authors realized their mistake, and we thank them sincerely for that. It's encouraging. And you know why Ukrainian experts and hack journalists plagiarized Ratsir's disinformation? Why they took it as a basis and published it in their own media space? Because it was a paid commission, and they couldn't find anything genuinely dirty or provocative about Allatra. So, they grabbed shit straight from Russian hands, swallowed it themselves, and fed it to others. Why couldn't they find anything, you ask? Because there wasn't anything. Every intelligence agency in the world at some point searched for Allatra's money. Remember that? Did they find any? No matter how they investigated Allatra, no matter how they wiretapped, it was all for nothing. These are decent, honest people, volunteers, the most worthy people, in my view. Those who've checked know this, right? And the court in Ukraine rejected the case against Allatra 5 times because people clearly understood that the years-long persecution was being orchestrated by some scumbags, not even local ones. But through the media space, they had the means to attack, buying off journalists, staging PR campaigns, just like Pavel Broid used to do, and maybe still does, living under some other name. After all, no one's seen his grave. The examples I've cited clearly show the methods used by Russian anti-cult structures in Ukraine. We're dealing not just with ideological pressure, but with a form of covert informational and psychological warfare. They use tools of soft power, a Trojan horse capable of quietly infiltrating public and state institutions. This form of influence is no less dangerous than overt military aggression because it destabilizes the state from within. The methods they use, from systemic discrimination of unwanted groups to spreading sabotage manuals, pose a serious threat to democracy, territorial integrity, constitutional foundations, and social stability. This kind of activity undermines trust in state institutions, violates human rights, and fuels internal tension. Now let's return to today's key players. Ratsir's agents in Ukraine, Irina Kremenovska and Alexei Sviatogor. Earlier I spoke about the activities of Pavel Broid and the AUAC, the All-Ukrainian Apologetic Center, in the name of St. John Chrysostom. The AUAC operated in Ukraine from 2011 to 2018. And as you may recall from the previous episode, I suggested that Kremenovska essentially picked up the baton from the AUAC in 2017 and continued the same anti-cult activity, identical in format, and using the same playbooks, cults, expert evaluations, and legislation, all under the same Dvorkin-style banners, adopting the same terminology. Evidence for this can be found in data from the web archive showing the first updates on the websites vilnislovo.com and elresearch.center, the sites run by Kremenovskaya and Sviatogor. That data indicated they began their active operations around 2017 to 2018. In other words, the AUAC closed down while Kremenovskaya appeared. What's the web archive? It's a free online service that allows you to view archived versions of websites, a kind of time machine for the internet. We captured and documented this data at the time. So what do you think happened after the last episode about Kremenovska, aired in late April 2025? They wiped the history of those two websites, vilnislovo.com and elresearch.center. For the record, anyone with ownership rights to a domain can do this, and this detail is more relevant for investigators. Now, if Kremenovska and Sviatogor have nothing to hide, then why have they done that? But if they do have something to fear, then it all makes sense. It's time to cover up the traces, right? The changes are real, and I've presented that fact in this film. Next, let's look at Irina Kremenovska's article titled in translation into English, Fake Production as a Sign of One's Own Agony. In it, Irina confidently claims that whoever manufactures fakes is in agony. But in my opinion, the one in agony now is Kremenovska herself. Reading her article, you really get the impression that she's in agony herself. She talks about Egon Chalakian, claiming he's supposedly working in the interest of the pro-Russian organization Allatra, and suggests that hiring a U.S. lobbyist would cost about $150,000. So, if we follow her logic, feel free to correct me in the comments if I'm misreading this puzzle. A pro-Russian organization, namely Allatra, which Russian prosecutor General Krasnov is about to ban in Russia, hires Egon Chalakian, an American lobbyist, for $150,000 to tell Russians about the threat of the Siberian plume? Is that it? Or should this bizarre scheme be filed under a criminal case and a psychiatric evaluation? Plans change, and it's quite possible that they might just dump Kremenovskaya. I also got the impression that this article was written by someone with psychological trauma, someone who desperately wants to feel important, who wants to achieve something in life, and who craves power. And in his own mind, she has already climbed to some kind of cloud-piercing peak, and now looks down on people, calling many of them parasites. She's eager to punish, exact revenge, and inflict suffering. But there is another point of view. Personally, my friends and I view the story of Irina Kremenovska as if through the foul oval opening of a public toilet. I find it disgusting to look in there, to sift through these details. That hole reeks of madness. She is a sadist and a tormentor. She poisoned dogs, and now she poisons people, and somehow remains unpunished. Why? Is it because of the protection racket that Sviatohor bragged about so loudly? Then that protection itself ought to stop and ask oneself, is it worth it? But is it worth it? Reading her scribbles, I realize she gets some perverse pleasure out of humiliating other people. She and Dvorkin are two of a kind. Both walk over bones, both wallow in filth up to their necks. Read what she writes. For us, the more filth, the better. A quote from Kremenovska. Both Dvorkin and Kremenovska have coprophilic tendencies. I decided to type just 2 words into the search bar of the Vilna Slovo site. Lino, manure, and dermo. Shit. Made a collage of these words, collected it all so you could see the full palette of brown shades, with words and phrases taken from Kremenovska's and Sviatohor's publications on the Vilna Slovo site. All is taken from there. I didn't invent anything. It's not even funny anymore. Indeed, it's some kind of sect of co-profiles. Looking through a recent article on RBK reporting that at an international forum in Washington, Ukraine was recognized as an example of protecting religious freedom, where Dvorkin and Kremenovska were also mentioned. It noted that attendees praised the criminal case opened against Kremenovska as an important precedent demonstrating the state's ability to lawfully respond to hybrid threats to democracy. Reading that article, I realize Ukraine could today become an even greater example for many countries of the world. Because if Ratsir's agents are brought to justice, it will be a historic event. It really will go down in history. I'm not exaggerating. This news will be historic. Ukraine could become the first state in the world where destructive activities by anti-cult structures are stopped at the legislative level. And we could witness a new stage in the development of democracy. This is serious, very serious. Many still don't realize how serious this is, but ultimately the court will decide. Next, let's try to answer the question, was Alexander Dvorkin the ideological mentor of Irina Kremenovska? The same Dvorkin known for his ties to the FSB, who created his own totalitarian sect with a Nazi ideology, who built a structure aimed at suppressing the rights and freedoms of citizens, both in Russia and beyond. His main platform, irony.ru, the Ratsir's website, long ago became a source of harsh, systematic anti-Ukrainian propaganda. This is not just criticism. It spreads hateful statements, aimed both at politicians and at the entire Ukrainian nation. I'll return to this in more detail at the end of the film. But for now, I want to share a fragment from Egon Chalakian's video, Europe's Fate After Siberian Plume Eruption. Who in Ukraine blocks planet's protection? I believe this excerpt fully answers whether Dvorkin was Kremenovska's ideological mentor.
It is precisely this man, Dvorkin, who serves as the ideological mentor to Kremenovska. Her rhetoric is also closely aligned with that of Ratsir's vice president, the Russian priest Alexander Nobel-Pashin, a vocal promoter of the narrative of neo-Nazism developing in Ukraine. His so-called religious work consists mainly of disseminating Russian propaganda designed to justify armed aggression. There is ample public evidence that Kremenovska is without question an agent of the Russian organization Ratsirs, which is directly linked to the Russian Federal Security Service, FSB. A comprehensive linguistic analysis of Kremenovska's rhetoric in materials published on her media platform, Vilne Slovo, reveals a consistent overlap in language structures, terminological formulas, and thematic emphasis with those found in Ratsir's affiliated media resources. This provides a well-founded basis for asserting that her communication strategy is shaped according to the directives of that very Russian entity. Specifically, in strict adherence to Ratsir's playbook, Kremenovska engages in the systematic discrediting of the same internationally recognized religious and civic organizations targeted by Ratsirs. She also attacks leading Ukrainian religious scholars and human rights advocates, individuals who played a pivotal role in securing Ukraine's religious independence and in the recognition of the autocephaly of the Orthodox Church of Ukraine, OCU. It was she who actively promoted labels such as sect lobbyist and agents of the West to discredit these figures, phrases that mirror the rhetoric of Russian Orthodox Church priest and Ratsir's vice president, Alexander Nobel-Pashin, who used the exact same language to malign these respected religious scholars. Notably, the official website of Nobel-Pashin, the missionary department portal of the Novosibirsk Diocese, which operates under Ratsirs, featured a glowing article about Kremenovska. The piece, reprinted from her own website, is written in an unmistakably celebratory tone and virtually lionizes her efforts in the so-called fight against cults, placing her alongside another Russian anti-cultist and vocal proponent of radical Russian propaganda. What is particularly striking is not just the content of the article itself, but the platform on which it was published. The Nobel-Pashin website, where Kremenovska is celebrated, is known for its consistent and virulent anti-Ukrainian rhetoric. Notably, it hosts a piece entitled "Ukraine is a Cult," in which Ukrainians are subjected to blatant dehumanization. That such an openly propagandistic and anti-Ukrainian Russian publication could so easily find an ally in a Ukrainian expert like Kremenovska speaks volumes about the true nature of her so-called educational activities in Ukraine. When it comes to the ideological foundation of Irina Kremenovska's work, one revealing example stands out. On the official website of the Center for Economic and Legal Research, which she leads, there is a post announcing a project ostensibly aimed at assisting victims of so-called cults. Yet right there on that page, on the Ukrainian platform, and without any disguise, appears the slogan of Ratsirs, the Russian organization led by Dvorkin, well known for its ties to the FSB and its active role in Russia's information psychological operations. This is a direct indicator that Kremenovska's ideological and methodological source is, in fact, the Russian agenda. Moreover, A look at the archived version of the antisecta.org website, where Kremenovska served as coordinator and one of its lead contributors, reveals that the site is saturated with quotations from Alexander Dvorkin and links to his articles and books. In the anti-cult fighters section of the site, Kremenovska's Ukrainian Center appears unabashed alongside Racier's resources and figures known for their explicitly anti-Ukrainian stance. Kremenovska's rhetoric concerning the religious group Jehovah's Witnesses is also deeply revealing. Russia remains the only country in the world where this group has been officially designated as extremist and completely banned, a move initiated primarily by Dvorkin and widely condemned by the international community as a blatant violation of human rights and freedom of religion. Yet, Kremenovska, in her articles, praises this ban as a model of effective policy and openly expresses indignation that Ukraine has yet to follow Russia's example on this issue. Her writings on Jehovah's Witnesses include verbatim quotes from Dvorkin's public interviews, which she presents as her own analytical conclusions. Taken together, these elements form a clear picture. Kremenovska's actions do not merely align with the agenda of the Russian security services. They are explicitly grounded in that agenda as their ideological and methodological framework.
The next episode about Irina Kremenovska is no less interesting, and I'll begin a bit unusually with 7 facts about Lyudmila Filipovich. Fact number 1. Lyudmila Filipovich is a well-known religious scholar, doctor of philosophy, professor, and vice president of the Ukrainian Association of Religious Scholars. Fact number 2. In 2008, a publication appeared on epochtimes.ru titled, "Sectologist from Russia told Ukrainians what to believe." A quote from the article, Vice President of the Ukrainian Association of Religious Scholars, Lyudmila Filipovich, during a press conference on December 27th in Kyiv, emphasized that some critical remarks by Orthodox sectologist Dvorkin about Ukraine's Orange Christians constitute interference in the country's internal affairs, which must prompt a response from state authorities. Personally, Mrs. Lyudmila said, "I see in Alexander Dvorkin's visit a well-planned program of undermining Ukrainian independence and sovereignty." Filipovich reminded those present that Dvorkin publicly reacted to the Pomerancheva Orange Revolution, describing it as nothing less than the Orange Plague. I quote, "We must understand that there are people outside Ukraine who are not thrilled with what is happening in our country," Filipovich said. Fact number 3. Together with international religious scholars, Lyudmila Filipovich participated in the preparation of the work Anti-Cult Ideology and Fekris Dangers for Religious Freedom, the White Paper. In that document, she provided compelling evidence of the destructive activities of Alexander Dvorkin and Alexander Novopashin, their anti-Ukrainian stance, and their influence on the European community through the Fekris organization. Fact number 4. In 2016, Filipovich, among other human rights defenders, gave a statement on the official website of Jehovah's Witnesses criticizing the situation in Russia. In particular, it concerned the consequences of the work of the Expert Council on State Religious Evaluation, which Dvorkin headed starting in 2009. The article was titled, "Russian Expert Opinions on Extremism Raise Distrust Among Experts from Different Countries." Fact number 5. In November 2022, 82 Ukrainian scholars wrote an open letter to French President Emmanuel Macron. Listed first among the signatories was Anatoly Kolodny, president of the Ukrainian Academy of Sciences, and second was Lyudmila Filipovich. The scholars drew Macron's attention to the umbrella international anti-cult organization, Fekris, which has close ties to Russia and where Dvorkin served as vice president for 12 years. The scholars questioned why Fekris was funded by the French government. The letter's point was this: the authors, 82 Ukrainian scholars, were trying to draw attention to the fact that for many years, Fekris had actively supported its Russian members in the Kremlin in conducting aggressive propaganda. Particularly outrageous to them was the fact that Fekris members continue to operate in Russia, spreading hate speech, calling Ukrainians Satanists and sectarians, all amid a war. The letter also mentioned specific figures, Dworkin, Novopashin, and others, and emphasized that anti-cult rhetoric had even been adopted by President Putin himself and began to be voiced from the highest platforms as accusations against the West of Satanism. Fact number 6. On June 2, 2022, 15 NGOs and 33 scholars and public figures sent a letter to the U.S. Secretary of State requesting that the United States initiate a procedure to strip FECRIS of its consultative status at the United Nations Economic and Social Council. This is an extremely rare request, based on the fact that FECRIS-affiliated associations had for years engaged in Russian propaganda and continued to cynically support the Kremlin at the outset of its war against Ukraine. Among the signatories were 15 Ukrainian scholars, including Lyudmila Filipovich. Finally, viewers will find it interesting to know that Lyudmila Filipovich, Viktor Yelensky, and Anatoly Kolodny are known for making a tremendous contribution to strengthening the sovereignty of the Ukrainian state and for helping to eliminate the influence of Russian propaganda and disinformation emanating from the Russian Orthodox Church, Moscow Patriarchate, on Ukrainian territory. Confirmation of this is also the fact that Ukraine's Thomas and the autocephaly of the Orthodox Church of Ukraine were made possible in large part thanks to the efforts of Filipovich, Yelensky, and Kolodny. And what does Kremenovska have to do with it? In 2019, Irina Kremenovska suddenly launched a campaign to discredit these distinguished Ukrainian religious scholars, Filipovich, Kolodny, Yelensky, and Sahan. She began her expose article with these words: "In Ukraine, the problem of forming a professional expert approach to granting new religious organizations the status of legal entities and their registration remains unresolved to this day." Unresolved to this day? And whose opinion is that? Kremenovska's? Or perhaps someone in Moscow decided that there is a problem and that it remains unresolved? Let's read on. The basis for making appropriate decisions by authorized executive bodies should be an impartial and substantiated opinion, and not attempts to lobby the interests of individual religious communities by the experts themselves. And then came the beginning of the discrediting campaign. Let's watch a video.
After an article about the lobbying of the interests of new religious organizations by individuals holding positions in the Ministry of Culture and sitting on the expert council, specifically after her article about Lyudmila Filipovich, along with such figures as Anatoly Kolodny, Professor Viktor Yelensky, and Alexander Sahan, who for years have served on this expert council and given positive opinions on the activities of the Church of Scientology, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, Jehovah's Witnesses, and so on, we raised the question of how Mormons, Jehovah's Witnesses, and other non-traditional religions were ever legalized in Ukraine. And quite reasonably, we also asked whether Scientologists were preparing to do the same. Well, the answer is obvious, isn't it? After that, literally within days, my accounts began being shut down, first on Facebook, then on my YouTube channel.
A question arises. Why did she even get into this? Why did she so openly and straightforwardly attack Ukraine's leading religious scholars, who had always taken a strongly negative position toward Dworkin, Rossiers, and FECRIS, and who had always defended Ukraine's religious freedom? Watch the continuation of this video.
Therefore, the concept of religious freedom, unfortunately, is now distorted in our country. Religious freedom by no means implies permissiveness or that all power will belong to various non-traditional religions.
So let's call things by their proper names.
Religious freedom is respect for the rights of all believers, but at the same time, we must also look to the experience of those countries where there is more order. After all, there is a traditional religion there, a church, which is also supported and protected by the state. And in many countries, such as Greece and others, it is even enshrined at the state level that the state religion is, say, Christianity or Catholicism, or phrased some other way. There are Muslim countries.
This in no way complicates life for citizens.
Well, why did Kremenovska even start debating freedom of religion in Ukraine? And talk about how it should be? Does she have issues with Article 35 of the Constitution of Ukraine? Because it's written very clearly there how it should be. This is a very important point. Where it all starts. How it should be. Where did Kremenovska get this idea of how it should be with the freedom of religion in Ukraine? Did she come up with it herself? Or was she inspired by how Dvorkin dealt with Article 28 of the Russian Constitution through the elastic concept of sect? They simply left it out by exploiting flaws in legal terminology and just shoved it aside. Thanks to Dvorkin's efforts, Russia today has no constitutional article on guarantees of freedom of conscience and religion. Note, there are no guarantees there. There are no such guarantees. And so I keep thinking, why all of a sudden? How did she shift in just a few years from hunting stray dogs to hunting distinguished Ukrainian figures who made an enormous contribution to strengthening Ukraine's sovereignty and eliminating Russian propaganda? Why? It could perhaps be seen as coincidence, if not for 3 preceding hours of proof of Kremenovska's ties to ratseers. Come on, doesn't it look exactly like yet another strategic move right out of Ratseer's playbook? Let's suppose. Let's look ahead. What is the scenario there? They sideline religious scholars, push through anti-cult legislation, take the helm themselves, become the experts, gain power and authority, start banning groups, legalize repression, and after the term sect, they introduce another rubber word, extremism, just like in Russia, and sweep away anyone deemed undesirable at the direction of the same curators in Moscow. So could that happen? Well, sure it could. Or to put it more plainly, Irina Kremenovska decided that the esteemed figures of Ukraine's scholarly elite were incompetent to provide expert opinions on religious organizations in Ukraine. In practice, that meant just one thing: an attempted takeover. An attempt to create a new expert commission that would operate under completely different principles, according to Kremenovska's vision, namely, fighting religious communities, pushing for their prohibition in the country, and criminal prosecution. In essence, terror. This fully, and I repeat, fully, matches the ideology that is practiced today in Russia under the influence of the ROCMP and directly of Ratseers led by Dvorkin. It's absolutely identical. Take note of another point. Russian media on their portals also criticized the same scholars as Kremenovska did. But what's even worse is the prospect. Just think, a sadist and animal abuser, a person with obvious mental issues, debating on the religious freedom of an entire nation. How is that even possible? Moreover, she's taking concrete, deliberate steps toward realizing her, or more likely someone else's, global goals. And no one knows about it. But you didn't know, did you? Can you imagine what would happen if that sadist in Ukraine took the same post as Dvorkin holds in Russia? After all, she enjoys humiliating other people. She enjoys other people's suffering. How did she come to power? How did it happen? Nobody knows. Everything happened quietly, unnoticed. You're hearing about it now for the first time, aren't you? And how did she become an anti-cultist? Another interesting question. Once upon a time, a person lived a carefree life, poisoned dogs, reveled in symphony of the death throes of four-legged friends. And then, one fine morning, she woke up and launched a bustling, stinking public campaign to save the world and all of us from evil sectarians. Without proper education, without any background, without a legend. Just as it happens with Dvorkin's hounds. Where did she get the desire to become Ukraine's second Dvorkin? Or are these just my wild fantasies? Am I making this up? Well then, let's reflect in the comments. There is such an opportunity. Constructively. Maybe you have some information. Write, friends, share it. With the facts, please. It might be interesting because so far, from what's been laid out above, only one conclusion suggests itself: that they were well paid. Why else participate for years in informational terror? Why attack the international Allatra movement? Why? Did they cross her path somehow? No. What personal benefits? What reasons? What motives? Personally, so far I see nothing but money and the desire to become Ukraine's second Dvorkin. And that is a serious motive. The only real motive belongs to rat-seers and those behind it. And now it's time to talk about Alexander Dvorkin and his role in processes that can, without exaggeration, be called complicity in the genocide of the Ukrainian people. It's not an easy topic. It was first raised last year in the Impact documentary. Today, I'd like to continue that conversation to explore it more broadly, more deeply, and most importantly, in the context of the Irina Kremenovska case. Just to make it clear who we're dealing with and what role Dvorkin plays in the system that, for decades, has been carrying out subversive operations against Ukraine. After Russia's sudden invasion of Ukraine, many people still can't grasp what happened to Russian society. What kind of massive psychological manipulation and experimentation had to be carried out on the collective consciousness for people to take that final step with such certainty and obsession? A war against a brotherly nation. It's already been 3 years since the war started, 3 years of defeats and immense losses, and yet millions of Russians continue to believe in some incomprehensible, unattainable illusions, and refuse to stop striving to seize what does not belong to them. Hundreds of thousands dead, dozens of cities wiped off the face of the earth. For millions of people, that February morning became the start of a tragedy. Their lives were irreversibly changed. For many, lives turned into a nightmare. Result of propaganda, they'll say. That's clear enough. But what kind of propaganda exactly? Where did it start? What kind of implants or seeds were planted? They'll say television, mass media. Fine, I agree. But what came before that, specifically? The ideology of the Russian world. From Ilyin, from Dugin, Surkov, Gundyaev to Solovyov. That's clear too. Okay, but that's where many people stop short. Today, I'd like to show you another layer. Less obvious, but no less significant. It's a covert manipulative system of influence over public consciousness. And let's start, perhaps, with the theoretical foundation. I'm talking about the Impact documentary. That film helped many people to look at what's happening from a different angle and understand a great deal. As you may recall, the film lays out a typical scheme used by anti-cult terrorists.
Criminal scheme by anti-cult terrorists.
So, let's summarize. The typical scheme of terrorist actions by the anti-cult movement against a targeted group follows universally precise steps. It begins with labeling the group as a cult or a sect, continues with stigmatizing the group in public opinion, fabricating accusations and criminal cases, and ends with discrimination against members of the targeted group, persecution, and the use of physical violence, up to murders. According to this model, anti-cult terrorists can persecute absolutely any group of people, whether religious or secular. It doesn't matter. The most crucial steps are labeling and initiating a media campaign to discredit the victim in the media. Once this is achieved, implementing the remaining steps is only a matter of time.
Quote, crucial steps are labeling and initiating a media campaign. In the media, the remaining steps are only a matter of time. Everything always starts with dehumanization.
Dehumanization serves to justify future crimes, dull the conscience and critical perception among the population. Dehumanization is the processing of society to accept and participate in future crimes.
Dehumanization serves to justify future crimes, dull the conscience and critical perception. Let's keep these formulations in mind. Now, let's turn to history. Since the early 1990s, a system of anti-cult rhetoric began actively taking shape in Russia, allegedly aimed at combating totalitarian sects. In reality, it became a convenient mechanism for suppressing dissent, controlling the religious sphere, and creating the image of an enemy. At the center of this system were Alexander Dvorkin and the Anti-Cult Center in the name of Irenaeus of Lyons, founded by Dvorkin with the support of the Russian Orthodox Church of the Moscow Patriarchate. That center later became Ratziers, the Russian Association of Centers for the Study of Religions and Sects. From its earliest years, since 1993, this center did not limit itself to religious themes. Its activity was marked by methods of generating moral panic, xenophobia, stigmatization, and labeling, ranging from psychological dependency to hostile totalitarian cults. Such language of intolerance shaped public consciousness to fear and reject anything non-standard, independent, or non-canonical, not only in religion but also in culture, politics, and ideology. Dvorkin openly denied non-Orthodox groups the right to exist, branding them as infection sects, cancer cells, tumors, plague, and threats to the state. Since 2014, the rhetoric of sectarianism began to be actively applied to Ukraine as well. In pro-Kremlin media, the Ukrainian state, its government, its army, even its society, began to be described as a totalitarian sect, the Maidan sect, Satanists, and zombies. In short, the vocabulary was taken directly from Alexander Dvorkin's arsenal. His tried-and-true methods of cult discreditation became tools of state informational warfare. It was precisely through this anti-cultist lens that the initial dehumanization of Ukrainians was carried out. First, they were defamed, stripped of individuality. If they're a sect, that means they have no will of their own. They're controlled by external forces, by the West. Then, they were stripped of rights. You can fight cultists, take their property, their real estate, their land, and eventually strip them of their humanity. Sectarians, Satanists, man-eaters, cannibals, and so on. Very few know that this method has historical parallels. In the 1930s, Nazi Germany launched mass campaigns against cults and secret societies. At that time, under the leadership of Walter Kunneth, who had his own apologetic center. These campaigns preceded Nazi Germany's military invasion of the Soviet Union in 1941 and the outbreak of World War II. The goal of these anti-cult campaigns was to eradicate dissent, ideologically unify the nation, impose an external enemy, and legitimize future aggression. Now compare. The same thing happened in Russia from 1993 to 2022. Under the guise of fighting sects, the authorities systematically began purging alternative voices, eliminating the unwanted, reinforcing the society's dependence on religion, and constructing a centralized ideology. Just as blacklists of dangerous sects were compiled in Nazi Germany under Kunneth, the same was done in modern Russia under Dvorkin. Just as Kunneth cooperated with the Gestapo, Dvorkin cooperated with the FSB.
Now you see the lists compiled by the Nazis on one side, and, for comparison, the list compiled by the leader of the Russian terrorist anti-cult group, Alexander Dvorkin, on the other. As you can clearly see, the anti-cultist list encompasses virtually all religious minorities in the Russian Federation, including even some representatives of Orthodoxy, whose views differ from the main line of the country's official religion. Additionally, the list includes some business enterprises and secular organizations, destructive cults, and totalitarian sects. Each criticized organization has a page featuring a list of negative publications about it from various media sources, which were apparently initiated by the center itself. The style of these publications about different organizations is very similar. They are filled with identical emotional and judgmental headlines and descriptions, and extensively use emotionally charged language, in essence, hate speech. This includes deliberate defamation and the portrayal of members of the criticized groups with dehumanizing labels such as zombies, rapists, slaves, beasts.
In reality, in a society marked by religious diversity, where various denominations coexist peacefully and are recognized as equal, it is extremely difficult to mobilize people for aggressive military actions. Wouldn't you agree? When a society upholds the principle of religious pluralism, people are less susceptible to propaganda rooted in hate. They're less likely to see their neighbors as enemies, right? And the opposite is also true. When a state is preparing to mobilize the population for war, it requires unity, an ideological stronghold, and the revival of the so-called gene of superiority within society. Or in other words, the cultivation of a sense of exclusivity, chosenness, of being a people supposedly chosen by God, with whom God himself is allegedly aligned. This so-called gene of superiority is, in fact, a euphemism. In essence, it refers us back to the very same ideas on which Nazism was based: belief in the exceptionalism of one's nation, race, mission, and the right to dominate. Historically, such narratives were used to justify aggression, repression, and genocide. Can one confidently launch a full-scale war without first carrying out an anti-cult purge? Try answering that question. Because before you fire at an external enemy, you first have to silence the internal one. Those who think differently, who doubt, who ask questions, whose voice of conscience is louder than the voice of command. That is why the historical parallels between Nazi Germany and modern Russia demand the most careful and in-depth analysis. What we're talking about is the preparation of consciousness, of public consciousness, the cultivation of hostility, the creation of an enemy image, a cult of power and chosenness, and the extermination of critical thinking. That's one of the steps on the path to war. This is a very serious topic, and it cannot be ignored if we want to understand how something like this could happen. But let's return to Ukraine. There's another point to consider. We can also observe a fairly clear connection between anti-cult rhetoric and religious policy in Ukraine, particularly through the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the Moscow Patriarchate, ROCMP. For many years, the Russian Orthodox Church of the Moscow Patriarchate sought to maintain spiritual hegemony, and the recognition of the autocephaly of the Orthodox Church of Ukraine in 2019 delivered a serious blow to those ambitions. In response, the anti-cult campaign took on a new tone. Ukraine was no longer presented merely as a sectarian state, but as a supposed threat to the traditional values of Russian Orthodoxy. These narratives began linking religious and political elements, laying the groundwork for justifying a military invasion. Thus, instead of being a tool for protecting society from manipulation, anti-cultism in Russian practice turned out to be a mechanism, and I emphasize this, a mechanism of ideological mobilization for launching a major war of conquest. It helped implant a convenient worldview in the minds of Russian citizens, one in which we are the bearers of truth, of traditional and correct values, while they are deceived, inhumane sectarians, dangerous subhumans, or to look at it another way, sect equals antisocial, puppet-like, dangerous. Everything Western equals alien, externally controlled, satanic. Within this logic, any violence becomes permissible, even justified. If you've noticed, throughout this story, I've repeatedly mentioned remarks made by Ratsir's agents claiming that Ukraine is overrun with sects, that no one is fighting them, that Ukraine is turning into a global totalitarian sect, and so on. Before 2014, such propaganda drops were relatively rare, and mostly came from Ratsir's agents. But after the Euromaidan, when Russian society had already been primed through the work of people like Alexander Dvorkin, a more powerful flywheel of dehumanization was set into motion. Let's go back to March 2014. On March 16th, a sham referendum was held in Crimea on joining Russia. And right the next day, on March 17th, 2014, TV channel Russia 1 aired a talk show titled Evil Spirits of Maidan, The Mysticism of the Ukrainian Pogrom. The program was blatantly propagandistic. The experts in the studio speculated about the spiritual future of Ukraine. Though, in truth, the entire format was designed to convince Russian audiences that Ukraine had gone astray, that it had lost its moral compass and spiritual identity. The talk show had one goal: to forge a clear association in the viewers' minds that Ukraine's aspiration for freedom was not merely a political threat, but an evil that must be fought as a matter of principle and faith. The program's central speaker was Alexander Dvorkin, the leading figure in Russia's anti-cult movement. His stance was unambiguous. Ukraine, as a state, was a spiritually infected territory, and the West was using cults as tools to destroy Orthodox civilization. Knowing a bit about how television production works behind the scenes, I can say with a high degree of certainty that Dvorkin was not simply invited as a guest expert. He was one of those who helped shape the script of the broadcast. Watching this video 10 years later, it becomes clear that the entire production served one purpose: to justify future aggression, not only geopolitically, but supposedly on spiritual grounds. This example clearly shows how anti-cult rhetoric was transformed into a weapon of ideological warfare, used to justify violence against Ukraine. They needed to create the image of a terrifying enemy, and they did just that. After a brief wave of patriotic euphoria over Crimea's annexation, the show's host moved on to the main theme of the episode.
Tonight we won't be talking about the material, but about the spiritual. The wolves of Maidan in sheep's clothing. Prime Minister Yatsenyuk is a member of the American totalitarian sect of Scientologists. Acting President Turchinov is a pastor of a Baptist church. The Orange ex-mayor of Kiev is a member of a dangerous sect of Pentecostals and Charismatics.
And right off the bat, using Dvorkin's language.
There were about 250 different sects operating in Ukraine, and it was precisely these sectarians who turned out to be among the main destroyers of Ukraine's fragile statehood.
A claim that didn't hold up under any scrutiny later on.
It was a bombshell when it was announced that Ukraine's current Prime Minister, Arseniy Yatsenyuk, is a member of a totalitarian American sect, the Scientologists.
Another lie from Dvorkin. It was later confirmed that Yatsenyuk had absolutely no connection to Scientology.
A sect that is banned in many countries around the world.
Banned in many countries. Really? Remember, Kremenovska also said, Scientology is banned in many countries around the world. That's another Dvorkin's lie. Scientology is banned only in Greece and Russia. That's it.
A sect that is banned in many countries around the world. A sect whose materials are recognized as extremist in Russia. A sect that recruits its followers.
Sect.
A former auditor, one of the high-ranking officials in the Church of Scientology in Kiev, Ukraine, Andrei Savitsky. Hello, Andrei.
And here comes the familiar, tried-and-true anti-cult scheme. At the center is the so-called defector, a former member of a religious group. They find someone who's left a community, take them under their wing, give them support, media attention, financial help. In return, the person starts speaking out, sharing revelations, betraying their former friends without mercy, positioning themselves as a victim, and gradually turning into a typical pseudo-expert, just like all the other anti-cultists. There are countless examples of this, and each one illustrates how polished and repeatable this cynical method of discrediting religious minorities has become. Then followed Dvorkin's manipulative inserts. Let's follow what he said. I'll quote only his parts.
Let's be clear.
I'd like to draw attention right away to the Scientology cross. Look closely, it's actually a satanic cross, originally created by Aleister Crowley, a cross crossed out with another cross. Scientology adopted it from Aleister Crowley, the leading Satanist of the 20th century.
Instilling rejection, fear, and intimidation.
Scientology is an international intelligence agency that gathers information on everyone and anyone. There's a core Scientology procedure invented by its founder Hubbard called auditing. Auditing is when a person is put into a light hypnotic trance, and under audio and video recording, they're pressured to reveal their most intimate secrets, their sexual history, everything they're ashamed of, any offenses, and it's all recorded. It's a tool to control that person. That's why that's why today Yatsenyuk calls himself a Greek Catholic. If he ever had any connection to Scientology, then he's still hooked for life, because they know everything he's afraid to tell anyone, and so they control him.
Utter nonsense, intimidation, and fear-mongering. Again, this politician had no connection to Scientology.
They even have special departments that target the elite. Internal organizations whose job is to recruit celebrities, political elites, and so on.
So essentially, this is a tool for hardline social control, right?
As Haber wrote in his youth, we've found new ways to turn people into slaves.
More fear, intimidation.
The organization Kostantor, or Sea Org for short, is Scientology's internal elite order. Its role is comparable, say, to the NKVD during Stalin's time, an organization that controlled everything. When someone joins it, they sign a pledge to remain loyal to the organization for the next 1 billion years. Yes.
Again, intimidation, fear.
It should be noted that in 1993, Scientology signed a secret agreement with the Internal Revenue Service of the United States, and attached to it was a secret protocol. According to experts and insiders, it stated that Scientology provides information to the CIA, and in return, the U.S. State Department lobbies for Scientology's interests around the world.
More fear, more intimidation.
They've even canonized Josephat Kuncevich, an executioner, a man with the blood of hundreds, if not thousands, of Orthodox victims on his hands.
Again, rejection, intimidation, fear.
Most people have heard of sectarian groups that carried out mass suicides. You may wonder, how do you force a crowd of hundreds or even thousands of people to kill themselves? Very simple, through word shifting. If you say, no, let's kill each other, let's kill ourselves, no one will believe you. But if you say, let's shed our outdated spacesuits and ascend to a new human level, it sounds much more appealing. Gradual word shifts, and people no longer understand what they're really doing.
Again, fear and intimidation.
It's about peace. They shout, peace. We're for peace. Without peace, we stand for peace. And then throw Molotov cocktails. Now the people no longer understand that throwing Molotov cocktails and screaming for peace are completely incompatible. Look at the communion amid bloodshed that's happening there. People are coming to communion with rage. They're filled with rage.
Again and again, fear and intimidation.
Today's Kiev looks like something surreal. You mentioned pagans. Pagan rituals are happening even in places sacred to Orthodoxy. We witness such rituals ourselves.
People are abandoning the Orthodox faith and declaring that Orthodoxy was brought by the Jews and that the real Ukrainian faith is paganism. It's a return to ancient pagan beliefs with all sorts of pseudo-historical myths and so on. And this will all end with pogroms against Christians.
Dworkin was on a roll, or more accurately, in a frenzy. Pure propaganda, lies, manipulation of the public consciousness. This broadcast pulled the trigger. It escalated the dehumanization of Ukraine to a new critical level.
Representatives of the terrorist network of anti-cult groups have not limited their targets to specific organizations and their members. They carried out a successful campaign to demonize an entire nation. The goal of this campaign was to prepare the public in their targeted country for aggression against this nation and to justify the extremely brutal and ruthless actions that were subsequently taken against its people. In fact, the anti-cultists orchestrated and legalized a genocide against an entire nation, the people of Ukraine.
As history shows, anti-cultism often leads to genocide because it teaches people whom it's acceptable to strip of rights, freedoms, and ultimately life itself. Since 2014, thanks to Dworkin, Russian propaganda has portrayed Ukraine as a cult created by the West. Just look at these publications. The narratives about the Maidan cult, victims of zombification, a totalitarian Western cult, and the threat of neo-paganism started getting increasingly louder. Intolerance was growing more intense and more widespread. Tried and tested Dvorkin's methods became tools in the statewide information war. His words are like sparks in dry grass, igniting hatred that later spills over into bloodshed. Dvorkin is an instigator. His rhetoric helped lay the groundwork and push Russia toward war. He launched a monstrous mechanism, then slipped into the shadows. But the consequences of his words are all too real. It's a crime against humanity and a trail of shattered lives. Think of Rwanda, the most horrifying genocide of modern times. An entire country went insane for 100 days. In that time, somewhere between 500,000 and 1 million people were killed. Even if we stick with the low estimate, 500,000 people, divided by 100 days, that's 5,000 people per day, or 200 people murdered every hour, brutally murdered, hour after hour for 3 months. How could that happen? Who led them there? The radio. Radio-Télévision Libre des Mille Collines. That's what it was called back then. Hate radio was another name. They used the radio to call for murder, broadcast names and addresses, sang insane songs.
yakomeje kubabwira nti mu baturage hari ibyisoko ko byakoranye n'inyenzi inkotanyi byari bihari byari byinshi ibimenyetso simusiga birahari biragaragara ibyitso byarabonetse ndetse n'inyenzi zimwe zari zibarimo zagiye bigaragara mu mpande nyinshi z'igihugu cyacu ibyo byagiye bigaragara ko ibyo byisoko ko byari bihari ariko ni mu baturage gusa icyo ni ikibazo nakomeje kuvuga ese koko ibyo byitso byari mu baturage gusa mu ngabo z'igihugu urumva ko nta byitso birimo iki kibazo kirakomeye kuko ibyitso biri mu ngabo z'igihugu nibyo biriho bituma igihugu inyenzi ririho zijagata igihugu cyacu
araseseka ntayorwa turatubyumva baturage burya niyo ngabo ikomeye hanyuma ntibacece ku muntu utagushaka bishoboka ntabyo Imana abaturage bamwanze burya ntabwo yakwinjiramo abantu tubona bakorana n'inkotanyi ni Sebukinganda wa Butete muri Kidaho Lawrence yani umugore w'akenyeri kubisomera ruhije konseye wa Butete nakorana n'inkotanyi ntaguma inkotanyi ifite akabare kuri komine Kidaho n'abasore bo mu secteur ya Gitare bo ahitwa ku Rusizi n'abasore bo mu Burambi nyine ngo barigize iya kane n'iya gatanu batagomba kuba akantu muri Kigali y'umujyi kuva uyu munsi kuri Pasika ejo n'ejo bundi akantu kateganijwe muri uyu mujyi wa Kigali ese nuko itariki ya karindwi ya muri
uwumva avuga ati jye ntibindeba jye nifite n'ubwoba natubise abashinzwe kumudukiza nibashyireho umwete bamudukize abakozi bandi beza bifuza gukorera igihugu cyabo barahari abo bagambanyi bagiye kwiga imbunda zo kuza kutumara murabazi jye simbazi ubazi n'abatubwire babadukize nk'uko minisitiri w'intebe yabwiye ati iyi ntambara tugomba kuyirwana kandi tukayitsinda tugomba kwitsinda kuko yavuze ko ari iya nyuma ndifuza ko mwajya mutwumva mugasemura imvugo yacu ku buryo iba yavuzwe mukumva impamvu tuba twavuze dutyo buri jambo mukarisesengura mukumva impamvu riba ryavuzwe rityo ntirivugwe kuriya nuko turi mu bihe bidasanzwe.
Yego Kamongi mu gitondo icyo sha muhaburuza abasore bari hariya hepfo hafi y'ibagiro umuntu ajya ku Kimisagara simpaza ariko ni ku Iteme ariko nababwira yuko ibintu mwamaye ngatumagura byanguye nabi natumaguyeho gatatu ariko birakaze ariko ngo bibahakuraye kabisa murinde rero uwo mwobo w'amazi ejo batazagira inyenzi iwunyuramo muzayimerere nabi mumaze kunywa kuri ako kantu.
Dimanche 19 juin 1994 et il est 16h22 à Kigali dans le blindé de la SNM. Avis à tous les IND qui nous écoutent. Oui, à tous les IND qui nous écoutent. Le Rwanda appartient à ceux qui le défendent vraiment. Et vous, les IND, vous n'êtes pas des Rwandais. Inyenzi Inkotanyi n'ababwiye abasirikare bacu nibo ba mbere mbabwira urubyiruko rwagutse kugira ngo bafashe abasirikare bacu mbabwira inkumi mbabwira abasore murabyumva rero inyenzi ntabwo zishobora gukandira abantu bose. Imana tugira iwacu nuko ari bake cyane ndetse nubwo twabariraga ku ijana 10 ku ijana ubwo basigara 8 ku ijana abantu se koko muze twishime nshuti inkotanyi zashize muze twishime nshuti yewe imana ntirenganya koko kuvuga hano bitugwana tugatsinda inyenzi inkotanyi burundu nazo dutsinda urubanza rwo kubaho kuko muzaba turabarwanya kandi batsinda n'udusingo turumvikana n'utwarigisira mu gifu ubwoko bw'abantu bari sinzi imana ukuntu izadufasha kugira ngo tubateme niyo mpamvu ariko tugomba guhaguruka tugatema abantu babi ubwoko bw'iby'inkotanyi gukora abantu babi abantu rero bagomba kugira tunabundi ko tugomba kugenda ariko se mama noneho nta nkotanyi zanerekonaga zagiye he tugomba kuba zarashize zigatwiririmbire muze twishime nshuti inkotanyi zashize muze twishime nshuti yewe imana ntirenganya koko.
Now tell me, how are today's anti-cultists any different? It's the same incitement to violence, same blacklists on the websites of the Irenaeus of Lions Center, with people's addresses, lists of potential victims. They compile names of people and justify aggression toward them. Incite and fuel hatred, divide society into us and them. Dvorkin and his racers, they are the modern-day version of Radio Mille Collines in Rwanda. Tell me this, would 500,000 people have been killed in Rwanda without that radio station? And now let me ask the question another way. Would Russia have invaded Ukraine if not for Dvorkin's anti-cult campaign and the legal sanctioning of repression? Would Russia have invaded Ukraine if not for Alexander Novopashin, Dvorkin's right-hand man, who spent years drilling it into the heads of law enforcement and military officers that so-called Ukrainian neo-paganism was a threat? It's one thing when a TV propagandist says it, but when a priest speaks to the faithful, that message bypasses all critical filters. And he did travel. Judging by these photos, he traveled a lot. And again, it was exactly Dvorkin who first started talking about neo-paganism. He even wrote a book, Who Invented Neo-Paganism? And suddenly, every religious outlet in Russia was sounding the alarm about how dangerous it was.
At the most recent meeting of the Holy Synod, there was even a special directive stating that we must pay close attention to countering this neo-pagan ideology.
Isn't this all part of a massive propaganda machine that laid the groundwork for war? If people hadn't been told for years that Ukrainians weren't real people, that they were some cult, pagans, Satanists, ordinary Russians never would have believed that Ukrainians needed to be killed. So who did that? Who, for years, drilled into the minds of Russia's elite that Ukrainians weren't a brotherly people, but some kind of cult, a bunch of neo-pagans? Who did that?